I'll wait just a couple more seconds to introduce our speaker for tonight as I see our participant numbers going up. We're excited to have you all here tonight. All right, our numbers are getting up there. Welcome tonight. It's the November 1st meeting of the fall series of our Master Beef program. We're super excited to have you all here. We're also super excited to have our speaker tonight, Dr. Saulo Zoca. If I mispronounced your name, I'm super sorry.
No, you're good.
He's our new beef cattle specialist here for UT Extension. He's actually taking over Dr. Reinhardt's position as he's moved up further up the chain. But with that, I'll let him get started as everybody's starting to hop on, and we'll get to know him a little bit better as he starts his new position. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Mallory. So I was invited here today to talk about reproductive management. I'm going to start here very briefly here how this presentation it's going to be outlined. So as Mallory mentioned, I'm just a new faculty joining University of Tennessee. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal background, a little bit about myself and where I come from. Then move on, kind of setting the stage here, talking a little bit about U.S. and comparing U.S. and Tennessee beef cattle production, where we are in terms of the United States and the state of Tennessee, or in the east portion. I have a cow-calf timeline just so everybody understand where I'm going and what I'm talking about. Moving on to a breeding season, a herd performance topics, wrapping up with heifer development, and basically our take-home messages, what I would hope you guys to remember from this presentation. Here, as I said, I'm going to start here with my personal background, and probably you guys have heard my accent, and that's because I'm originally from Brazil. This is my state here on the southeast of Brazil. And for those that are not really familiar with Brazil, I just want to point out here that Brazil is the second largest cattle herd in the world. We are just behind India. And when you would think about commercial herds or animals being used for production, Brazil is actually number one. And my state has approximately 10 million heads of cattle, and it seems a lot, but when we compare it to some of the other major states in Brazil, we are not on the top there. So here we have one state here with 32 million heads of beef cattle, or mostly beef cattle, a little bit of dairy too, but the large majority here would be beef cattle. So you might be wondering what this guy from Brazil is doing here. So I actually have been through a lot of regions of the United States. And actually here in this map of the United States, all those orange states that I have highlighted here is places that I've been through my graduate training here in the US, either doing my graduate training, doing research, or going for conferences in some of those states. So talking about my education, right? So what did I do before I got to this position with UT? I started my degree in Brazil in a veterinary school. So Brazil is slightly different than the US. So to become a veterinarian, you don't go through for example, an animal science program, and then you get into a doctor of veterinary medicine. It's a straight veterinary medicine. It's a very condensed, heavily in classes throughout, and it's a 5-year program. So I graduated there, and here I have a picture. Some of you may have heard. So this is what we call him, Dr. Zequinha, or Dr. Vasconcelos. He was my mentor while I was there at São Paulo State University. Then I came to the University of Idaho to do my master's with Dr. Joe Dalton, pictured here. When I finished my master's, I came to South Dakota State. That's where I'm talking with you today. I'm here at South Dakota still. I came here to work with Dr. George Perry on reproductive physiology. Dr. Perry moved to Texas A&M doing my program, but I stayed here in South Dakota. Excuse me. And then I finished my program under Dr. Walker. Well, so after I finish my program, I start my postdoc here at South Dakota with Dr. Walker still. And so I'm just wrapping up my postdoc this month before I move to Spring Hill. I'll be, my office will be in the Middle Tennessee Research and Extension Center there, the Amtrak in Spring Hill. So talk a little bit about myself, but you guys, I know you guys are not here to hear about me. We are here to talk about cattle and talk about reproduction. So some of the interesting things about when we think about the US is how different our beef production is throughout the United States and how to compare. So if and all of those different environments will play a role on our reproductive management and what we are thinking about selection of animals and how we develop those animals to become the next generation of cows. So just as an example here, those two pictures are about the same time of the year. This one is in Montana, and this one is in Georgia. So the availability of feed is different, and the environment is very different. So we need to think about that when we're talking about overall beef production. When we think about specifically about the state of Tennessee, we rank the 16th total cattle inventory, and we have about 1.8 million beef cattle in the state. So another thing that it's important for us to look into is how is this cattle distributed in our operations. So when we look at the census that USDA reported recently published, that was in 2020 that they published this. On this figure here on your left, we have the number of operations divided by the size of the operation. So 1 to 9 head of cattle on the operation all the way to over 1,000 head. On here on the left, those left numbers are related to the bar of this graph that is related to the state of Tennessee. And this line is related to overall United States, which correspond to these numbers on the right. So if we look here on the number of operations, it's very similar when we compare United States and Tennessee. So most of those operations are on the small size type of deal, and then kind of middle in the medium size of operation and little operations on the large size of operation. That's how the USDA classify. But when we look here on this other graph is what percentage of cattle are within those division or those category of operations. Now there's a difference when we compare Tennessee with the US. The large majority when we think about US are on those medium to large size of operation. That's where the majority of the cows are. However, in Tennessee, you're going to see the large majority of our cows being on that middle to small size of operation. So that's kind of plays a role on how I set up this presentation. So thinking about those since the majority of our producers are towards that medium to small, I try to assess those producers the most. So also when we looked at census, they look at what kind of reproductive technology producers are using. So they ask the producers what kind of reproductive technology they are using. So some of the reproductive technology that they asked the producer if they are using are estrosynchronization, artificial insemination, pregnancy diagnosis. So that would include palpation, blood test, ultrasound, then pelvic measurements, body condition scoring. They consider here as a reproductive technology, semen evaluation, and embryo transfer. So when we look at those numbers, here we have it split by region. So East region would represent where Tennessee is, and we have Central and West region. And if we focus here just on the right side of this figure, when we just any of these reproductive technologies, what percentage of operations are using it? In our side here where Tennessee belongs, it is pretty low. So we need to focus increasing this. How can we improve the use of reproductive technology in our state, in our region overall? Try to get closer or maybe get better than looking at the central region here. So overall, there was about 37.5% of those operations that use at least one of those reproductive technologies, thinking about all the operations in the United States. So when we look specifically at the breeding season, so why I'm focusing here on the breeding season. So when we are trying to introduce reproductive technologies, if we don't have a breeding season, it's very hard. So kind of setting up a defined breeding season is the first step for us to introduce any other reproductive technology. And then only 30% of our operations here in the east side of the United States actually had a defined breeding season. And then if we think about most of Tennessee operations are on the small to medium size, we are talking about 35 to 55% of operations having a defined breeding season. Also, when we look at use of artificial insemination, so that's not estrosynchronization with artificial insemination, it's just artificial insemination. 18.5% of our heifers received at least one round of artificial insemination, and only 6.5% of our cows receive at least one round of artificial insemination. So those numbers they're improving compared to previous reports, but we're still a long ways to go, especially if we compare to the dairy world on over 90% of dairy cows are AI. So we're here to talk about repro, right? So why is reproductive management important? Why reproduction is important on a beef operation? So if we look at the economic value, reproduction is actually 5 times greater than the calf growth. What does it mean? It means that if we don't have that calf come in on the ground, it doesn't matter the potential for growth of that calf, right? So we need to focus on having our cows having a calf. Then the growth become important. So if we don't have a calf, we are not going to generate a revenue. That's what that means. Also, reproductive failure and losses. So those cows that fail to become pregnant during the breeding season, or those cows that get pregnant and lose the pregnancy, costs approximately $500 million annually. So what is our objective, right? So the objective for a cow-calf operation is to produce one calf per cow per year. So that should be everybody's objective. That's how we become profitable. Why is that? If a cow misses a calf and we keep that cow on the herd, it's unlikely that cow would bring enough revenue to pay the cost of keeping her for that year open. And that's also tags along with the next bullet point that the cow needs about 3 to 5 calves, weaned to 3 to 5 calves in order to pay her developmental cost. So how much we spend with those heifers to get them to the cow herd, they need 3 to 5 calves. So we want to manage them to hopefully be closer to that 3, not to that 5, but that's what research have shown how much it costs for us. So where do we start, right? So let's first talk about what is the cow-calf timeline. Most of you probably know this, but I think it's nice to bring back and talk about it again. So here I'm going to talk about, we wean the heifer, she develops all the way, and we wean that first calf of that cow. So first we have here the heifer development process that goes from that weaning all the way to that first pregnancy. So when we wean those heifers, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select those heifers that are potential replacements. So those heifers that we don't want to keep them as replacement, they should be sold. We should select them already here, so we are not wasting money trying to get those non-profitable animals within the herd to become pregnant, or get them pregnant and then they get off of the herd too soon. Then those heifers that we decide to keep, we need to develop them to become pubertal, and they need to become pubertal before they reach the breeding season or their first breeding season. And we are going to talk more about this in future slides. Then after that breeding season, we need to figure out which animals are pregnant and which animals are not pregnant during here. And those open animals, again, remember, it's very costly for us to develop those heifers. If they don't get pregnant, they need to be sold to pay the development cost. Otherwise, it takes many more calves to pay for that extra year before they will become pregnant. This period here that we are calling the heifer development, it's heavily influenced by their genetic and nutrition. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this too. And also I wanted to remember that the genetic of the animal, it's part of the dam, so those resident animals within our herd, but also part is the sire. For us, it's very hard for us to change the genetic of those those cows, the resident cows, right away. So it takes longer time. But changing the sire genetic or choosing what sire we are bringing in, it's a little more feasible because we can bring those AI or bi-new bulls that brings higher genetic potential if we need to change something. Okay, now we have those pregnant cows and we're moving on to their first calving season. Hopefully we select bulls with good calving ease. All our heifers calve unassisted. We don't have problems with that. And they move on to their second breeding season. Now, again, if those heifers do not become pregnant by the end of their second breeding season, they need to go. We need to sell them. That's how we maintain a sustainable and profitable herd. Of course, we still have the calf with her. So not necessarily we need to remove them from the herd right away, but as soon as we wean those calves, shortly after, those cows need to go. And also after we wean that calf, that's another opportunity that we can assess those females. And if there's any female that produced a bad calf, we might be able to sell those calves. Sell those cows either as pregnant cows that if they don't feed the objectives of our production herd, or if they're pregnant, maybe we wait till the next year and they will not come into our breeding herd next year after they calve. So we are here to talk about reproductive management, reproductive technologies. So where would reproductive technology fit into this timeline here? And just as I forgot, remember those cows, those heifers being here will become those heifers here, and those cows will just continue on to their second calving season, third breeding season, so on and so far until they become open. So on the reproductive technologies here, right on the beginning here, we can use reproductive technology to assess and help us select those replacement heifers. We have technology that can help us advance their age at puberty or change or induce their puberty. We can use technology during the breeding seasons, such as artificial insemination, estrus synchronization, and then for pregnancy, during pregnancy detection, during ultrasounding, palpation, any of those. So continue on. So where do we start? As I mentioned, the breeding season is kind of the first step to introducing it. some of producers are reluctant of introducing a breeding season because it will change a little bit on their labor requirements. But we have to remember that when we do a breeding season, labor will become a little more concentrated on certain periods of the year, but it will be less concentrated in other periods of the year. Also, another important thing to remember is when we have a breeding season, especially when we have a short breeding season, now we don't have an overlap of when the cows are calving, when the cows are being bred, and then when we are weaning calves. So we have different periods of the year for each one of those without overlap. So here I have an example of a operation. It's a small operation up in Kentucky. This is an example that Dr. Les Anderson shared this past year at the animal science meeting. So this operation had 17 cows. They calve pretty much every month of the year. And with 17 cows, they wean 13 calves. So the first thing that they did, they got there and they defined breeding season there, so they would have a short calving season. Also, they had to remove a few cows because they were too off to feed within that breeding season. So that's why they had a decrease on the total number of cows on this example here. And this is a real farm, okay? And then, but when we look at the number of calves weaned, they only lost one calf produced. So it wasn't a big loss compared there and little change in management. Now, let's take a jump to the future here all the way to 2021, and let's compare what happened with this operation from 2015 to 2021. So they had 17 cows and they did not buy more land. They only changed management. They did not have more resources. They used the same resources available. They just managed the resources better. So they were able to move from 17 cows to 22 cows. Also, if we look here, they moved from 13 calves being weaned and produced and sold to 20. So with a little adjustment with their management in the same area, they were able to produce 7 more calves or 7 more weaned calves. So, and then again, if we look here, they're pretty short breeding calving season. So yes, they had a little more condensed and labor intensity here, but now the rest of the year, they don't have to go check those cows to see if any of them is calving. So I think that's a pretty good win on this situation. So after we have a defined breeding season, we can also introduce other technologies there, such as astrosynchronization. We can use them combined, and several studies have shown that there is a benefit there, and we can maximize that benefit. Most of that benefit will be related to changing the calving distribution. So this research here now, it's with a larger herd, so about 300 head herd. And that was done at the University of Florida. So here they have 2006 and 2007, it's kind of their baseline. They did not use reproductive technology there. They did have a defined breeding season here, about 120 days, a little on the longer side, but they had a breeding season. Pregnancy rate about that 80 to 85% here, with a mean calving day with 80 days. First year here, they start using astrosynchronization and fixed time day-eye. They did change slightly here, but virtually no change on the length of the breeding season. They maintained their pregnancy rate, but they were able to significantly change here the mean calving day, which means those calves were now older at weaning. And we're going to be talking about the advantage of having those older calves. Just by adding that fixed time day-eye here on that first year, they saw an increase in value of those calves of about $87. Second year, they started decreasing their breeding season. So now from 110 to 88 days. They did not see significant changes on the pregnancy rate, even though they decreased their breeding season. Small changes here or no changes on the mean calving day, not much changes, but we started seeing we need less work, right? We are decreasing our breeding season. But when we jump to the future here and look the results of 2013, with that smaller breeding season, especially if we compare it here to the beginning, there is an improvement on their overall pregnancy rate. Also, there is a further decrease here on their mean calving day. So those calves are even older by that fifth year here of using sixth year, sorry, using reproductive technology. And if we look here, the return they have or the increase in the value of those calves, it was approximately $170. And I cannot see you guys, unfortunately, here through this webinar, but if you're in a room and I ask if you guys would be happier with changing your management, improving your pregnancy rate and getting $170 more per calf, if you guys would be happier, I think everybody in the room would raise their hand saying, yes, we would be happier bringing an extra $170 per calf. Remember, not only are we bringing more dollars per calf, but we are producing more calves because our cows are getting, there's more cows getting pregnant. So most of this benefit that we are seeing here on this increase on the value of those calves is related to this, to the calving distribution. So when we look here, 2006, 2007, their baseline, here is the two lines. Pretty much throughout the breeding season, they have evenly produced calves. The cows get pregnant pretty much in a steady rate. As we started using reproductive technology, we start shifting this curve that way, which is good. So our calves are being born earlier on our calving season. And then when we look here, by day 21 on that 2013, 50% of our cows had already calved within that first 21 days. And we're going to talk the next slide more of the benefit of this. So what does it do to us on that increasing value is those calves are older. Remember, everybody or the large majority of our beef producers wean our calves in one day. The whole herd is weaned in one day, maybe 2 days. So when those calves are weaned, these calves are older, so they grew more and they will be heavier because of that. But also, we have benefits with the heifers being born early. So this research here, what they did is they got their heifers, separate the heifers on their first calving season here, those heifers that calve on their first 21, 22 days, and those heifers that calve day 23 or later of their first calving season. And they follow those heifers within each group until they leave the herd. What they saw is those heifers that actually calved early on their first calving season, they stayed in the herd longer, and on average, they produce one extra calf. So bringing a benefit of one extra calf and helping us reach that 3 to 5 calves that I talked about earlier. Also, those not only they stayed on the herd longer and produced one extra calf, here is pounds of calf weaned, or average weaning weight of those calves. Of course, on that first year, remember those calves are older than those that are older than those. Here they split in 3 times. So first 21 days, second 21 days, and 43 and older. But when we continue to follow those heifers, continue to produce heavier calves all the way to their 6th calf. So they stay longer in the herd, they produce an extra calf, and their calves all the way to their 6th calf are heavier, so they bring more dollars. So that's what I call the virtual cycle here. So we have vicious cycle when one bad thing leads to another, and we have the virtual cycle when one good thing leads to another. So what is happening here is if look at and combine the results that I showed you from the calving distribution that study with the one that I just showed you on the previous slide, those heifers are being born earlier. So those heifers that were born earlier had increased pregnancy rates. When they have, and also they had greater proportion of heifers calving within that first 21 days. So now their calves are born earlier, there are more calves being born earlier, and they keep feeding back to the system, and we keep getting better and better and better to that system. That's why I call it the virtual cycle. So how can we improve that number of females that are being pregnant early? As I kind of started mentioning before, we can use estrus synchronization to help improve. So we did a study here in South Dakota, and this first group, we compared only natural service to using synchronization and natural service. So when we compare those two groups, we did see a difference here. Our synchronization with natural service produced more calves earlier, and there is virtually no difference here when they finish calving. But I'll tell you that this distribution for this natural service, it's pretty good. We have about 80% of our females calving before they're 42, day 42. So that was already pretty good. But still, we were able to slightly change the proportion of females calving early here. And this synchronization protocol, we put a seeder for 7 days, we pull the seeder, no shots, and turn out with the bull. This synchronization in natural service was done for 2 years. And we did see, as we saw in that first example that I showed you, as we move on second year, third year following that, we see more benefits of using that synchronization technology. So on the first year, which is the black line here, we did see here that change over here with more calves that we did not see on the second year. But when we look at the second year here, we have almost 100% of our females calving within those 42 days. So calving earlier here on our calving season. So if we continue using the synchronization, we continue shift this curve that way. But now here, this is same research, but now we are comparing here using natural service with synchronization or using synchronization with artificial insemination. What we saw here, actually the synchronization with natural service did better overall here, and this is a combine of 2 years. The thing is, this was the first time these producers were using artificial insemination. And we have other literature that show that when we are introducing a technology, sometimes we see this drop on the benefit, or we don't see the benefit right away. But when we look at here, those producers that use synchronization, they use synchronization 2 years in a row. So the next year, they did not use natural service on the second year. And we compare that first year to the second year. Look at here, the second year is the orange. So now, again, by day 42, we have almost 100% of our females calved. So what I want to tell you here with this figures is either using natural service or AI with synchronization, we can shift that curve and we can bring and make those cows calve earlier during the calving season. That's what I was trying to show you here. But artificial insemination and fixed time AI with, so fixed time AI would mean breeding all of the cows in 1 day through that synchronization protocol. So there are other benefits to it. One, it enables us to use those bulls that are not present on the ranch. So not all of us can afford those extremely expensive bulls, high genetic, high-end bulls, but most of us can go there and buy a straw of semen from those high-end, very expensive bulls. And they become affordable now to put on our herd. So that will help us improve the genetic of our herd, which would produce animals that are more productive and more profitable. Not only the calves, but also our replacement females. Also, other benefits is we avoid venereal disease transmission. So those from when the bull is sick, has a disease that can be sexually transmitted, it can transmit to females. Through artificial insemination, we can avoid that because of the use of antibiotics that we have on the semen straw. Also, it gives the females pretty much an extra chance to become pregnant. So, because our females will get the first chance on day one of our breeding season. So we synchronize them, and day one of our breeding season is the day of the fixed time they are. And then within that first 21 days, they will have the second chance. When we are using natural service, they will only have one chance within those first 21 days. And remember, the 21 days is actually the length of the estrous cycle. So that's why we separate on 21 days intervals. And another benefit is we can inseminate both cyclic and non-cyclic cows. So females have prepubertal heifers or peripubertal heifers are not cycling. So using a synchronization, we may jumpstart them and make them cycle. And our cows, right after calving, they stop cycling. And they will return a period later, usually about 30 to 60 days later. They should resume cyclicity, but it's not 100%. There's females, and there's several factors that will affect the returning cyclicity or breaking that anestrus postpartum. So with the fixed time AI, we can also help those females return to their cyclicity. More benefits of using fixed time AI or an artificial insemination. This research saw a decrease in cost because they had more concentrated calving, and was also related to the decrease in days to observe calving. When this other research compared the fixed time AI to doing heat detection and AI, there was no difference on pregnancy rate. So they're not losing anything by doing a fixed time AI. This other research here showed an increase on weaning weight of those calves. That was related to the increased age that I showed you. Those calves will be born earlier on the calving season, but also to that increase in genetic because we're using superior sires with our AI compared to the natural service. There's, again, that shift in the distribution. And also, there was an increase on calf uniformity, an increase on genetic gain that resulted in more productive and more profitable calves. So I think I'm going to finish here on this part of talking about the importance and the benefits of the breeding season, how we can use our estrus synchronization and artificial insemination to improve that. And now I'm going to jump to the heifer development section here. That is another important factor to remember. The heifers calving early stays longer in the herd. So that's another important factor here. So how can we work on that? So the heifer development, it's kind of where we work on them to make sure they would get pregnant early and calf early. So the basic requirements for those heifers would be to attain puberty before they start off the breeding season. We're going to talk more about this. Conceive early in their first and also the subsequent calving season or breeding seasons. We just talked about this. Calving assisted as a 2-year-old. I talked a little bit about this when you talked about the cow-calf timeline. And this calving and assisted is very important to decrease some of the losses that may come with having to pull the calf or losing a cow and a calf because the calf got stuck. We are not going to talk much about here, but that sire selection plays a huge role here on this portion. And then that heifer needs to raise that calf by herself. So we are not pulling the calf and bottle feeding and increasing labor there. So, but let's focus on that attainment of puberty before they start off the breeding season. So first, what is puberty, right? So puberty is defined as when ovulation is accompanied by the visual signs of estrus and subsequent normal luteal function and life span. What does it mean? So ovulation would be, we get that follicle and we'll rupture the follicle. We'll have the egg that inside that follicle coming into the reproductive tract on the oviduct of the female. being able to possibly be fertilized if sperm is present. Estrus will be the behavior estrus, so standing to be mounted. That's what the signs of estrus that we are talking about. And then a normal luteal function and lifespan would be this corpus lutein here, the CL that I have on this picture, staying for the length of the estrous cycle. So providing that enough length that the progesterone is high enough so we can reach the maternal recognition of pregnancy. And then if that female is pregnant, we will maintain that corpus lutein. And also normal levels of progesterone, so reaching a specific level above a threshold. So the lifespan is important. So that, how do we know that without measuring anything? So that's when our females, if we are not breeding them, they will come in estrus every 21 days. So that will be a sign that the female have a normal luteal function and lifespan. So why talking about puberty before the breeding season? So first of all, there is huge variation when we look. So those are 3 multi-state research. And when we look at throughout the United States, there's huge variation from 19% of the females, those heifers being pubertal before the breeding season, all the way to 100%. Other research have related that the pregnancy success for those heifers is actually highly correlated with the percentage of them that are actually pubertal by the beginning of the breeding season, or they reach puberty early on during that breeding season. And also other research here have shown that there is up to 21% increase in the fertility from that first pubertal estrus all the way to their third estrus. So that's why specifically we want them cycling before they get into their breeding season, so they can go up to in that fertility potential. So we want those heifers reaching puberty around or before the 13 month of age. That's because we want them to become pregnant around that 14 to 15 month of age, and then calving as a 2-year-old. So what are some factors that affect age at puberty, right? So as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, genetic and nutrition plays an important role. In nutrition, we can break down here as pre and post weaning nutrition playing a role, but also the prenatal environment or fetal program. So the nutrition that those heifers are receiving while they're still in the uterus of their mamas. So, but we are not going to talk about this pre-weaning or the fetal programming portion. I'm going to focus on the genetic and pre-post weaning right now. So for puberty attainment, so for those females to reach puberty, genetic or the breed plays an important role here. So especially on age here, if we think about Indicus females versus Taurus females, those Indicus will reach puberty at an older age. And then weight, when we're thinking about smaller and larger frame breeds, they would have to reach different weights in order to become pubertal. We can select for early puberty. There is a moderate heritability here, 0.33 to 0.4. So since it's a moderate, it's not a fast increase, but we can select and will improve as we select for it. But puberty is dependent on the body reserves and the growth of that animal. There is a hormone that is called leptin that scientists have found that it was increased around puberty. This hormone is actually produced by the fat cells in the body. So when there is an increase in the fat body, there was an increase on this leptin hormone. So how does it play a role here in the puberty? So it's important to remember here, this is what we call the nutrient partitioning. So first, when the energy comes to the body of that female, it needs to reach maintenance. So that animal will use that energy for maintenance. What is maintenance? Survive. So it's going to use that to continue beating the heart for gut movement, for respiration. That's what maintenance means. Then, if we have extra energy, that animal is going to use that extra energy for growth and development. Then, lactation. So we are talking about heifers, so we can cross this here for right now. We don't need to worry about. So we need to suffice here the growth and development. Then they're going to use energy for reproduction. So if we don't fill up all this energy requirements here, we will not get, those females will not use energy for reproduction or attainment of puberty. So a good way for us to kind of estimate this would be through a body condition score of those females. It's an estimation of that body fat. Not necessarily because they are in a good body condition, they are pubertal, okay? So there's other factors. Some of those is the mature body weight here. So by or before that 13 month of age, those heifers need to reach that 55 to 65% of mature body weight on a good body condition. So good body condition will be somewhere between a 5 and a 6 on a 1 to 9 scale. That's the optimal that we want to develop in our heifers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, 55 to 65. There is some divergency between scientists, whether we should go 55 or 65. But basically, what you need to think about when you're deciding is 55 is the bare minimum. If anything goes wrong, we are below the minimum, we are going to hinder their development, and they may delay their puberty attainment. When you go to 65, those even if something goes wrong, we still have a wiggle room there that our heifers would reach puberty at the desired age. There are ways we can even shorten this age at puberty. So if we do a fast growth period between that 4 to 7 months for approximately 10 weeks here, we can increase animals that are pubertal early. By early, it means that 8 to 10 months of age to in 67%. We can increase that. So if we are trying to do something like this, we need to be a little careful. Remember, some of those animals may still be with the herd bull, and we do not want those females that at that age becoming pregnant. That will be a problem for their future development. So we need to be a little careful there. So how can we assess that reproductive performance or the reproductive potential of those females that we are developing to become our replacement heifers? So what we can do is use pre-breeding evaluation. And this pre-breeding evaluation can be done anywhere between the day we are starting the breeding season all the way to 8 weeks prior. We do not want to go farther out than 8 weeks because then we are too far and the results might be a little inconclusive. It might be a little hard to interpret those results. So you want to be probably around the 4 to 6 weeks prior to the breeding season. It might be the optimal window there. So we can make management decisions what to do with those females, whether they need more nutrition or less nutrition, or they're already good. We can slow down a little bit on their growth rate, some thing on those lines. So on this pre-breeding evaluation, we're going to be looking at their weight, their reproductive tract score, and the pelvic area. So let's talk about first the weight. So again, we need to decide what level we are going to be developing our females, either 55, 60, 65. That is a personal decision. At Amtrak, we shoot for the 65 for our heifer development. And how do we know how much those heifers should weigh at a 65%? So we need to look at the expected mature weight. So that's what that 65, right? The mature weight. So either we know the average mature weight of our females on the herd. So there are several ways we can identify it. We can use the last cows that we shipped from our herd to be slaughtered or to be harvested and get their weight there and use that as a base or average Or if we have scales on the farm, we can bring a few average cows and weigh them and figure out where we are sitting. Or if none of those are a possibility, we can also use a frame score and kind of estimate where we want to be, where we are on our mature weight. And then we are shoot for either seven, if we have a score 4, frame score 4, or our mature cows are 1100, will be at developing heifers to be 715 pounds, or more likely here, a 1300 pound cow, we were shooting for 800 to 850. So that's kind of where we would be shooting for. When you're talking about reproductive tract score, this is a score that goes from 1 to 5, the 1 being more immature reproductive tract, and a 5 being a more desired, fully mature reproductive tract. So here, the 1 and 2 here are our immature females. They have no activity on their ovaries or very little activity, so only small follicles there. Their uterus, it's not fully developed. The diameter of the uterine horns are fairly small. As they're further developed, so this 3 here will be our, we call peripubertal. So they're not pubertal yet, but they're getting close to. So there is slightly increase here on the diameter of the uterine horns. Start feeling some tone on that uterus. And then we start seeing larger follicles on their ovaries. And then the 4 to 5 here is what we consider our pubertal females. To be strict with definition, only 5 would be actually pubertal because we are seeing the corpus luteum. That, if you remember, when I talked about puberty, the corpus luteum and normal function corpus luteum is one of the components there. But that's what we consider those females that are already pubertal. So how is it done? So we can either be done by palpation, but most likely or more accurately, we can do with transrectal ultrasonography because we can actually measure those follicles. We can actually see instead of trying to feel those CLs compared to those follicles. And what we want to see on those heifers with a reproductive tract score 5 is something like this. A corpus luteum here this is an ultrasound picture, and we have here a large follicle here. So we have this structure and this blister-like structure right here. So when we're talking about those smaller follicles, that's what these arrows are pointing to here, those medium to small size follicles. So then the third component of the pre-breeding evaluation will be the pelvic area. So this is related to the stoichia, or the size of the calf that cow would be able to calve. So the stoichia is that difficulty of calving. So, and it's usually related to the disproportionately large calf compared to the pelvic area. So we will want to avoid that. So if we measure it beforehand, we can avoid that by removing those females that have extremely small pelvic area. Also, research have shown here that yearling pelvic area, so that 4 to 6 weeks before we start our breeding season, it's correlated to the pelvic area when they're calving around that 2-year-old. There is a moderate to high heritability on the pelvic area, but it also is correlated with mature size. So we need to be a little careful selecting too big or too large of a pelvic area, because we will be increasing the mature size of our cows. So maybe above the minimum, but in the moderate size there, so we are avoiding increasing too much on the cow side. So the way we do it, we need to set minimum standards here for what we are culling. So females that are not accepted to stay. Usually anything smaller than 130, it's too small to maintain in the herd. So we should not keep those animals. But anywhere between 130 to 150 square centimeters are a good threshold there for us to do on the pre-breeding evaluation. And also we should look at abnormal pelvic area. So as you see here, that's how we measure it. So we use this equipment that's called the pelv meter. We have it closed. So this is an open position. We have it closed. We introduce in the rectum, and then we open it the maximum we can, putting a little bit of pressure there. So then we record that height. We close it. Be careful to not pinch anything in there. We flip it sideways, and then we measure the width of the pelvis. And then same thing, we open it, record this, and then we calculate what is the area of the pelvis. So what I'm talking about here, consider abnormal pelvis. So the pelvis should be slightly higher than wider. So if they are wider than higher, we may have problems and may have problems during the calving process. So that's why it might be a better option not keeping those females in our herd. So depending on where we are doing here, and here I just want to show you so the correlations that we are talking about. So if you're doing that 12 to 14 months of age, our 600-pound heifer here, so kind of a medium-sized heifer, her pelvic area. So if the pelvic areas are 140, 160, or 180, this is the size of the calf that should be able to calve unassisted when she reached that 2-year-old. If we are measuring at preg check, so when they're 18, 19 months old, remember they are still growing, so they need to be heavier. So basically this would be representing the same animal here at 2 different ages. The pelvis should have grown. So that 140 pretty much represent that 180 at this age. And they can calve that 6 to 7 pound calf. So there are tables and references that we can look at. So that's why I'm talking about maybe that 130, it's a little too small and we should not keep, because we are looking for calves that are a little bit heavier than this 6 to 7 pounds. If we are having calves that are really heavy, we may need way larger pelvic area. So how do we use all these steps when we put them together? So again, we need to set the minimum standards. So it might be this that I told you or I'm showing you here, or maybe you have your own standards on your operation. Then we evaluate the weight, reproductive tract score, the pelvic area, and we're going to split our heifers basically in 3 groups here. Those heifers that are ready, intermediate, and cold. So what are they? So those ready heifers, they have reached that 55 to 65% mature weight, and they have their reproductive tract score that 4 or 5. Their pelvis is greater than 130, so we are good here, and they have that normal shape, so higher than wider. Our intermediate heifers, they are not there yet with their weight, depending on what is your threshold. Your reproductive tract score is not there yet. So there are 3, so you're close to, but they haven't become pubertal yet. They already have a good pelvic area. And again, they have normal shape. However, the cold animals here are those that by the time of that pre-breeding evaluation, they're less than 50% of their mature weight. Or that's a key component here. We have and, here we have or they are immature reproductive tract. So those scores 1 and 2. Or they have very small pelvic area, or they have abnormal shape. Those females would be on your cool section. So the ready heifers that we just classified, so those will be the heifers ready to enter our breeding season. 8 heifers, depend on when you're evaluating. So if you're at the breeding season, maybe they should not enter the breeding season, or we're just going to put down with the bull and see what happens, or do a synchronization with them and let the bull breed down. So there is still some management that we can do, but the chance of them becoming pregnant is a little bit smaller compared to those females. And then if you're early on, that 4 or 6 weeks before, maybe we can increase nutrition, bump them up to get to that 55 to 65%, and hopefully reach that nutritional status for them to become pubertal. And in our cool heifers, the recommendation would be to not use them as replacement heifers, move them to a stocker heifers or sell them as feeder heifers. So we are not wasting our resources trying to get them pregnant. And they may get pregnant too late on the breeding season, and then they will calf late, and then they may fall out of the herd sooner than that 3 to 5 calf. So that's kind of what I had here for us to this presentation, but just one last slide. Please do not forget your bulls, okay? Often we forget about the bulls. Breeding sounds exam is the best method that we currently have to evaluate fertility of our bulls. During the breeding sounds exam, we should evaluate the physical sounds. So basically, can that animal detect those animals in estrus and maintain that body condition of that animal? That's what would be the eye, smell, eat, hear. But also the structure. Can that bull actually go there and mount those females? Then we're going to look at the scrotal circumference that is related to the sperm production here. And we have standards here, and I have here on this table, what are the minimum standards? If they're below the minimum, so this is the minimum, I would encourage you to not use those bulls because it may interfere with our pregnancy rates, especially the early. So, and again, and finally, the semen quality will be another component. And again, motility and morphology here, 30%, 70%, that's the minimum standard. So when we use those bulls that are below the minimum, we are using what we call a subfertile bull. Doesn't mean that that bull is not going to get the females pregnant, but we are going to have lower pregnancy rates for those bulls compared to those bulls that pass the breeding sounds exam, at least 5%. And also there's a delay on when those females get pregnant because it will take more service for those females to become pregnant. So that we lose the benefits that we are trying to incorporate in our herd and having more females calving early, staying longer in the herd. The economic benefit per cost ratio, research in Brazil and US have shown pretty substantial. So for each dollar that you invest in a breeding sounds exam, you can get $36 back in Brazil or $17 back here in the United States. So I think it's a pretty cheap procedure compared to the economical benefit. So I've been talking about a lot about early, and this is where that math comes. So remember, we always wean, or most often we wean our calves in 1 day. So that 1 day difference for those calves born later represent approximately 2.5 pounds here per of lost weight at weaning. So if we have a market here about $170 per cent weight, we're talking about for each day that calf is born later, you're losing about $4, or for each week, about $28, $29. So I think those are substantial numbers when we're thinking, and that's even more incentive to try to bring those females, for the majority of them, to calve early during our calving season. So now is the true last slide here. So as a summary here, number one thing that I want you guys to remember from this presentation, we need a well-defined short breeding season. That's when we see the benefits of using reproductive technology. That's how we become more profitable and more sustainable. Our females need to get pregnant and calve early, so within those first 21 days. So we need a large proportion of our herd calving on the beginning of that calving season. That means they need to get pregnant early on the breeding season. Our heifers need to attain puberty prior to the breeding season. So around or less than 13 months of age, they need to reach that 55 to 65 mature body weight. And remember, even those heifers with 55% mature body weight, they need to continue to grow And both of those heifers will need to reach about 80-85% of their mature body weight by the day they calve. We can use pre-breeding evaluation that will help us become more efficient, so we are not using those less efficient animals, those animals that are less likely to become pregnant during the breeding season, and we can move them to a different purpose, finish them, and bring more money that way. And finally here, all the bulls should go through a breeding sounds exam every year. And why do I'm saying every year? Yes, young bulls, when you're purchasing them, they need to have a breeding sounds exam, and they need to have passed the breeding sounds exam. If we are purchasing older bulls, they do need to pass a breeding sounds exam as well. And also those bulls that are already in the operation, they do need to pass the breeding sounds exam as well. So all of them need to pass the breeding sounds exam every year. Doesn't mean because a bull pass a breeding sounds exam once, it will pass in subsequent years, right? So with that, thank you everybody for listening to me here. This was my first talk as a faculty member of University of Tennessee. Here is my personal contact here. If you guys want to contact me, I do not have a University of Tennessee email yet. I'll be housed in Spring Hill. You guys are more than welcome to stop by after December 1st if you want to talk with me or give me a call. So with that, Mallory, do we have any questions?
There we go. All right. Thank you, Dr. Zoca. Remember, if you have any questions, please use either the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll be reading those off to Dr. Zoca so we can get those answered for you all. Our first question of the night is, the 3 to 5 calf revenue per cow to cover their developmental costs. What is the carry cost that range of calving is based on? And is that the total of any and all reproductive costs?
That's a good question. So that is a research is being done, what it's a 2002, I think, research. And they kind of put all the developmental costs, feed costs, labor costs, pasture. There is a huge amount of things. And the reason there is a range is, well, some operations, like if you think here, I'm in South Dakota right now, most of our heifers are developed in a dry lot. That raises the cost. You have the yardage, you have the truck, you have to mix the ration and deliver. So that probably brings them closer to that high calf. But when we think about more on the range side, development heifer, if you're not using any supplementation there and they can reach that target weight, we might be looking at that 3 calf. So I hope that answer. If you didn't, just pop up another question. We can go back and revisit it.
All right. What is the average cost to AI a cow or heifer?
That's a good. It depends if it's just. So are we talking about estrus detection and AI, or are we talking about fixed time AI? Usually the cost for fixed time AI, it's about a $25 just the protocol without the semen. And then the semen, and that it really depends on what your average price will be, about $20-25 per straw. But if you look for it and maybe a seed stock producer, you can find straw that go over $1,000. So, but on a commercial side, probably $20 to $40 is on a conventional semen straw. That's what that would be for the semen, and about a $25 for a 7-day cold sink, for example.
All right. And then going kind of alongside with that, what is the most effective timed AI protocol in your opinion?
And that's a very, very tough question and interesting question. It really depends. Okay, so if you guys are not familiar with, there is a lot of protocol out there. If you go to beefrepo.org, that it's the Reproductive Task Force website, they have a pamphlet specifically for heifers, specifically for cows, and for sex semen too. They released this year. That's new there, and you can see all the protocols available, and all those protocols are very effective. Some of them may generate a little more pregnancy than others, but they require more labor, or you have to manage the cows in extra time. So, for example, those protocols with a pre-synchronization, such as the 6-day PG or the 7 and 7, they are pre-synchronization with a synchronization protocol. They usually generate a little more pregnancy than a protocol without a synchronization, for example, 7-day coasting, but you have an extra labor there. So it really depends where you are. If you want to do, for example, the 6-day PG can also be used with estrus synchronization, or estrus detection. So if you have the labor and you're willing to put the labor and put that estrus detection with the artificial insemination, and then do a fixed time AI in the end, we can also improve or maximize our pregnancy rates by AI. So there is a lot, and I don't think there is one fits all and one best protocol for everybody. It really depends where you are and what you're comfortable with. Really, the best protocol is the one that you're familiar with, and then you can use efficiently and effectively in your operation. That's the best protocol.
Wow. Up next, what do you think is the best time of year for a calving season for our producers in Tennessee?
We do traditionally, like up north here, we usually have only spring calving, not a lot of fall calving. I know in the south, there's producers that will have spring and fall calving. Honestly, calving season, you should define it based on your resources and your labor. So when is the best time for you to be calving? So that will really vary between producers. So some producers may have more availability of labor during the fall. So, and calving requires more attention to those females, so we don't lose any calf or female. So maybe the fall is the best time for you. Maybe you have more time on the spring, or you have more grass over the spring for your females, and you can develop them your heifers better to get the spring, and it costs you less to get them calving. So it's really operation dependent when is the best time to calve. So, but usually we are talking about either a spring or a fall calving. That's usually most of US. That's when we're looking for the calving.
Wow. And then of the reproductive technologies that you listed, which has the greatest rate of return? In other words, if you only introduced one of these technologies on your operation, which would you choose?
So if you consider breeding season a reproductive technology, I'll say breeding season. That is the number one. If you're not putting breeding season on that list, because I don't have it listed there, I'll say estrus synchronization might be the number one. But I would say preg checking, it might be right there. Because if we are not being efficient on detecting those females and we are waiting all the way to them calve, now we are losing our efficiency because we're keeping those cows in our herd, consuming our resources, feeding them, that we are not going to get a return from them, that the return would be the calf. So preg check and synchronization. So the estrus synchronization, bringing down, shift that calving distribution to having more cows calving early, but also the preg check so we can get those inefficient cows out of the herd right away or as soon as we can.
All right. And kind of going along the note of some of those reproductive technologies, can you talk about embryo transfers and kind of the beginning steps of it, I guess?
Okay. So on the beef side, we are kind of crawling over embryo transfer. Most of the embryo transfer are used for our seed stock producers. The dairy side is a completely different. much more advanced than us when we talked about embryo transfer, but they have more advantage than, on my opinion, okay, they have more advantage of using embryo transfer than we do. Unless you really want to change completely the genetic of your herd, I think artificial insemination, it's a little bit better because we can have better pregnancy rates with artificial insemination compared to embryo transfer. We can have more of our cows calving early with artificial insemination compared to that embryo transfer. But the process of embryo transfer, usually it's very similar to what we do for fixed time AI when you're thinking about a large scale. So we're going to set up those females, and then instead of coming and breeding now on that day of AI, we're going to wait an extra 7 days because that's the age of the embryo that we're putting in on those females. And that's when we're going to put the embryo on those females. That's kind of like the broad view and the pros and cons. For a seed stock operation, that's a great benefit using embryo transfer. So now we can have those very high value mating. So those very high end cows and very high end bulls, produce more embryos from them and put those embryos in our lower end cows, or use commercial cows to produce our seed stock generation, our bulls and cows or heifers that way. So on the seed stock, there are good benefits, or the advantage of the embryo transfer, I think, would be more prominent on the seed stock compared to the commercial herds.
All right. And then overall, as a general, what does synchronization cost per animal that you're going to synchronize?
So again, it really depends. That there is a lot of different protocols. I mentioned the 7-day co-sync because that's the widely used or mostly used protocol. So that uses a seeder, that uses 2 shots of GnRH, 1 shot of prostaglandin. That costs about $25 per animal.
All right. And then if some of our producers want to kind of invest in these AI services, how do we find a technician to perform these services, or should we contact our veterinarian?
You can contact your veterinarian. Some veterinarians, if they don't do, they will know people around you that do. If you're buying semen from one of the big companies, they usually have somebody around you that can AI, and they already have people that will do that service for you too. So those both are good people to talk to get there to your operation to do. We had in the past, and I'm hoping I can bring it back and do some AI schools, the M-Track. So you can also learn, and there not only me, but there are several AI schools, so you could also go and learn. I don't know about costs and what they're charging, but it varies a little bit between places. I do not want to throw a number here and then people will be mad at me because I'm saying they're too cheap or too expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. That actually rounds out all of the questions that are in the Q&A box. If anybody has any more questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I'll get those to Dr. Zoca. As a last question from me, what are you most excited about moving to Tennessee?
I would say starting my career. Basically have been a student for what, I'm 30 years old now, and pretty much my whole life I've been a student. Of course, grad school is a little different because you're already working, but being independent and walking with my own legs now.
No, I get that.
It's a challenge, but I'm excited to start this challenge and start doing some research, developing some of my ideas, getting closer to the producers, speaking with producers, doing more webinars like this or in person, especially the in person. I really like people interaction. I'm a big fan of people interaction, so I'm looking forward for those interactions in the future too. And run away from this cold weather.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I've been living in Idaho and South Dakota, so going to a more mild weather will be really nice.
All right. I think that rounds out all of our questions tonight. Thank you for hopping on tonight. We really appreciate it. The last meeting of the fall webinar series is actually this Thursday. Dr. Jason Smith is going to join us to talk about some feedlot cattle things. So we're really excited for him to come on as well. Again, thank you, Dr. Zoca, for joining us tonight, and I'll let everybody go.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.